right. And it says we are live on Facebook. So right now I have a few more people to admit to the Zoom. So just bear with me. People are joining us now, and I want to say thank you to everyone for being with us. Can you release your video order here? I'm not quite sure what that means, but that must mean no. All right, let's say welcome everyone to the Novi Public Library's The Rise of Asian American Hate Crimes program. I don't have to start with my glasses on right away, do I? I appreciate you joining us this evening, and I'm really moved by our subject today, and it's going to be a learning experience for me because I can admit there's so much I don't know about this topic. And after speaking with many of my guests that I have this evening, I'm looking forward to learning. And I'm hoping that we all can learn because maybe that's the path to turning things around that are so negative and hateful in our country today. So I'd like to start right off with introducing my guests. I would like to also say for the ones who are attending through Zoom, if you would keep your videos and audios turned off. If you have a question, if you're in Zoom, please type it in the chat and I will address your question or pose it to whoever you wish it to be posed to. And if you are on Facebook Live, you can type your question or comments in the comment section and I'll try and get to that as well. Okay, let's get right started with who we have with us. Several organizations. Joining me, I have representative from Rising Voices of Asian American Families. Laura, you are here. I'd like you to do just a brief hello to everyone. And tell us maybe a little
Hi,
bit about your
everyone.
organization. Can you do that for about a minute and a half?
Sure, certainly. So, hi, everyone, again. My name is Laura Misumi. I use she and her pronouns. I'm the part-time executive director at Rising Voices of Asian American Families. We're a relatively new organization. We were founded in 2019, and our mission is to organize Asian American women in Michigan. And I'll leave it there.
Very good. We also have from the Council of Asian Pacific Americans, Dan Moen. Let's hello to you, Dan. Say a little short greeting.
Hey everyone, I'm Dan. I'm with CAPA, the Council of Asian Pacific Americans. I am the Marketing Communications Chairman. I've been there for about a little over a year now, and we focus a lot on cultural and cross-cultural equity between different communities within the Asian community.
Very good. Okay, I also have from the APIA Vote. That's the Asian and Pacific Islander American Vote. I think I got that right. Linda, welcome to you.
Thank you. Hi,
Greeting,
everyone.
please.
Yeah. Real quickly, my name is Linda Schleicher. I'm with APIA Vote, which is the Asian Pacific Islanders of America, Michigan. And we're 501c3. We're nonpartisan. We're an organization committed to justice and equity for Asian American communities. You know, we're grassroots. And we're really interested in making sure that participants are and our constituents are having equal access to voting and having that opportunity. So thank you for having me here.
For sure, my pleasure. We also have a couple of professional psychologists here joining us, Dr. Xiao Wen Lo and Dr. Jennifer Tang. Both greet, please. Dr. Lo.
My name is Xiaowen. I tell people if they can say shower and Wendy, they can say Xiaowen, and last name is Lo, so it's a lot easier. If you want to call me Dr. Lo, that will be fine. I have a private practice in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I am a transplant, meaning I came to Ann Arbor 10 years ago. And originally, I am from Taiwan. I am a first generation Taiwanese American. Came to this country in 1995. So glad to be here.
Absolutely. Dr. Tang.
Hi, I'm Jennifer. I'm Jennifer, Dr. Tang. I'm the director and founder of a group practice in Ann Arbor, where we service also all of Michigan right now virtually. Our vision is to provide culturally responsive and diversity affirming therapy that's also rooted in research.
Very good. I heard the last few words and then it went out a little bit, but thank you so much, everyone. I think I covered everyone. I have one more guest that will be showing up shortly, I think, so keep an eye out. But thank you very much. And I did
But
ask
don't forget
who did I
Joy.
skip?
Joy.
Joy, how are you? I don't see your camera on.
Oh, I'm here.
Let me,
No worries.
hold on. I'm not going to skip you, Joy. Hi.
Hi.
Joy
Yeah,
is here, and you know what? She has is it a blog that you have?
yeah. I started a blog when I was in high school. I used to live in Ann Arbor and went to Pioneer High School, and I had a little blog post that I posted recently about Asian American hate crimes and my experience when I was in Seattle last summer. I had like a kind of traumatic experience which I can talk about later. But yeah, I also just graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in studying computer science and Chinese. So China is very close to my heart. I'm adopted from Beijing. And yeah, I'm excited to hear more today.
I love it. I'm already going to tell you now, this is going to be a two-part segment. We're going to have another discussion on the 1st of next month, May 1st, because we're not going to get through this. I got permission and I'm asking now, how do you identify ethnically? Because I know a lot of people wonder, you Asian American is all we know. And I'd like to know a little more. So anyone would start. I started with you before, Dan. Let's start again.
Okay. So I'm also an adoptee as well.
Look at that.
Yeah, I know, right?
And I adopted my daughter. We should have an adoption program.
That's so awesome.
Yeah, it's so cool. I got really excited when you said you were an adoptee. So, but I am Filipino. I was born in Montallupa, Manila in 1988. And then I was brought over here when I was 8 months old.
Great. Okay. Linda.
Yeah, well, my name's Lee again, and so as ethnically, I guess you said, I'm Japanese and Black, so I'm biracial. My parents met when my dad was in the Korean War, and he lived and was stationed in Japan for many years. My mother is from Tokyo, moved to Hokkaido and then back to Tokyo, and then they got married, lived in Japan for a while, came here, and I was, born in Detroit and raised. So I'm not a transplant. I'm from Detroit.
Wonderful.
That's great. Dr. Lowe.
I'm Taiwanese.
Okay. Dr. Tang.
Hi, I identify as second generation Chinese American. And so that means that my parents came over here for graduate school. And so I was born here. But there's probably some historical political context to that too, because I realize my parents are from Taiwan, but we identify as Chinese because historically, before the Communist Revolution, their ancestors are from China. So
Okay. Laura.
Hi, yes, I identify as Yonsei, that's fourth generation Japanese American, and that means that the way that the Japanese Americans count Issei is the first generation that immigrated to the United States. So my great-grandparents came to the United States from Japan.
Okay, very good. See, I learned a lot already. Let's dive right into the conversation because this is what's really important. All of the hate crimes going on, I don't even know how I want to start this off because it's just terrible. Hate is just awful in and of itself. But I want to know what's going on with all of the Asian American hate crimes. And is this something new for people who just really don't know? Now that we're all home with the pandemic going on, we can see a lot more through media. And I'm wondering, is it media that's bringing attention to things that have already existed, or is this something new? Let me start with Laura. Is that okay to start with you to kind of start talking about that?
Yeah, certainly. So I think from our perspective, something that I think we've seen a lot in terms of the organizations having statements about what happened in Atlanta, it's for us, it's not new. It feels very familiar in a lot of ways. And I think something that a lot of organizations have tried to do in commenting on these issues that have come up is really to offer the context that this is how white supremacy shows up in our communities. That for one thing, we have to re-explain the Page Act, we have to re-explain the Chinese Exclusion Act, we have to remind our fellow Americans of the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II. My whole family was incarcerated in concentration camps. They're from California. And so I think for us, the othering, the dehumanization, it comes up a lot. And I think in the last year, in 2020 in particular, we have seen, an increase in the use of xenophobic and anti-China language, honestly, from both sides of the aisle, but coming from on down from the White House and even in local politics here in Michigan too. And I think for us, we see what happened in Atlanta as unfortunately being like the sad and almost inevitable consequence of normalizing and using language like that in the context of white supremacy on the whole.
Mm-hmm. Who else can expand on that a little bit? Dan?
Yeah, I definitely can piggyback off on that because Laura, you covered all the bases right there. This has been going on for such a long time. And again, I'm not going to speak on behalf of the entire community, but I do feel that media didn't cover it. I was listening to a podcast actually recently. I believe it was from NPR, and they were talking a lot about how for so long Asian hate crimes were completely unnoticed. And a large part of that was the two sides of a coin. On one hand, it was not covered as often. So there was this almost subconscious like acceptance that this is okay. On the other hand, it was also because there was a lot of people who did not come forward and report it. And it's not entirely their fault because of the fact that the way that our society structures these, we come to someone and say, hey, I had this racist thing happen. It's almost like that cognitive dissonance kicks in, meaning that it's like, oh, are you reading that a little too much? Are you thinking too deeply into it? And when it comes to anti-Asian hate, a lot of what gets the media attention is the violent aspects of it. But what happens on a daily basis completely gets unnoticed. In fact, from a personal experience, a couple of weeks ago, I had to defend my existence on my own Facebook for 2 weeks straight. I had people come out, these two people in particular, come out and constantly like question, like, did you really have this happen? Don't look at it this way. It's how you interpret this. And it was consistent gaslighting. Luckily, I have such incredible friends who we all jumped on board on this. I'm like, you chose the wrong Facebook wall to choose. But
Or there's always that delete button,
yeah, there's always the delete button too. But it's like whack-a-mole. You take one and then you get 5 more. You take the 5 out, then you get 20 more. And it's just like, when does that cycle stop? So like Laura was saying, this has been going on for so long, but I think because of the pandemic, we've all been scapegoated now. We've been affiliated with this pandemic, with this disease. So now it's almost think of the disease, you think of an Asian, and now it's all global.
Yeah, I wanted to piggyback off of what Dan and both Laura, what they both said. And so this isn't new, but what we experienced a lot of is those little microaggressions or those little micro insults that other people would say, oh, it's no big deal. And so I'm a lot older than the two of them, so I can speak from experience. I remember
Not that much older. Come on.
but I remember when, and we talk about Vincent Chin a lot, and it's really important, and I'm very sad that I even have to discuss Vincent Chin, but the thing is, Vincent Chin in Detroit was killed because he was Chinese, but the two gentlemen that killed him thought he was Japanese. So it's really interesting, like they kind of put everyone in the same bubble, right? Everyone that looks a certain way must be Chinese, must be Japanese. So they thought he was Japanese. And this is a young man who lost his life. And the thing that was I was working at the time. And what I do remember very much was my own personal experience. My mother I'm first generation for her. And she was saying to me, don't get involved. Don't talk too much, because the way she came here and the experiences that she had was that you got to remember World War II was really still fresh in a lot of people's minds. She was Japanese, so she was facing her own prejudices. And then we fast forward. So I fast forward to say that So things kept going on. There were jokes that were in newspapers that were totally acceptable. There were people that were businessmen who were spewing from a platform a lot of dog whistling, and a lot of things that they were saying was against the Japanese, right? Because your product is, we're going to whip them. So it was very volatile during that time. And then we move forward to Vietnam. So now you have another group that people targeted again. But still, if you were Chinese, if you were Vietnamese, if you were Japanese, they just clumped everyone together. So again, little microaggressions, but I say 1,000, 2,000 of those, eventually it leads up, and I talk about like a pyramid. You have all these aggressions, and as they continue to culminate and grow, what do you expect? The next step is something very violent, and that's what we saw. And that's very scary, because a lot of us just did what my mom said. She kind of said, keep your head down. That generation is, my mom's in her 80s. Right. And so to see that is pretty painful today, because I think younger people are very different than what my mom's experience was when she came here. So,
and I do want to ask a question about that, the keeping your head down. I caution to stereotype, and I don't want to do that. And I want someone to even talk about stereotypes. But I have heard a lot in the Asian community that you are taught to keep your head down, avoid conflict. Talk about that and how it compares to the generation of today versus generation of past. Is that accurate when I speak on it? Anyone can talk. Laura, you look ready again. I'm going to get to the professional psychologist aspect of it in just shortly.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that that is the stereotype, right? The model minority myth. And we can actually even pinpoint in history when that myth was kind of perpetrated for the first time. There were some articles that came out in Newsweek in 1965. It was after the Immigration Act had passed, and it was after incarceration that was kind of setting up this dynamic, saying, oh, well, look how the Japanese Americans, after what happened to them, have been so successful in assimilating. And the point of making that stereotype was to draw a distinction and to draw a division between the Asian Americans and Black folks and brown folks and indigenous folks in this country, saying, well, if they were able to do it, why can't they? Why can't the others? And so I think that that's always been something that is incredibly damaging. It's also highlighted a particular survival strategy for a lot of Asian Americans that may live in predominantly white communities, for example, where they feel that their best way to succeed, achieve some modicum of financial security, is to keep their head down. And I think that, that there is also a history of Asian American activism and solidarity in trying to break through that model minority myth that often also gets swept under the rug, that I think is important for those of us today who are doing civic engagement and organizing to remember that important legacy as well, because we've been fighting against this, since that time, following in the footsteps of the Black Power movement, the Asian American movement, and things like that too.
So then when I hear you say model minority myth, for those of us that may not know exactly what that is it just one myth, or are there a number of myths that fall under that category? Please talk a little bit about that model minority myth a little bit, whoever can.
I just wanted to jump on this real quickly, just to also pinpoint as well, along with the model minority myth, before explaining more into it as well. Like Laura explained it so perfectly right there. The model minority myth is not a compliment. It never was, it was never designed to be, and it never will be. I want to make sure that's absolutely clear. And also, on a side note, the model minority myth has also been used against Jewish people as well, which has also been leading to a lot of anti-Semitism. And in their cases, according to history, the model minority myth was used predominantly against Jewish people in the sense of they own finances, all these conspiracy theories. So when we hear a model minority myth, it has never been used as a compliment. It was always meant to be, you got into the club of acceptance, but those people can never be part of this. And that's basically at the core of it, is what it's designed to. It's always been designed as a kind of like a dividing prop against constant oppression across cultures. So in a nutshell, when it comes to the model minority myth, it's constantly this idea of, look at how much money they make. look at how successful they are, look at how well off they are. But the problem with it is it takes all Asians and it clumps them to one group. But there's so many different groups of us, there's so many different ethnicities within the Asian community and the diaspora that it completely sidelines that. Like when it comes to poverty rates, there's higher poverty rates, say, for example, and again, I don't have the statistics out there at the current moment, but like, for example, you look at statistics in the Vietnamese community, in the Hmong community, and they get clumped along with, say, ethnic communities in the US that have more money. It's a constant double-edged sword, and it's always been weaponized.
I think now is a good time to talk to some of our mental health professionals, because how does that mess with your head with minority, what is it? Model minority myth. I've got it. How does that mess with your head with expectation and the pressure of being stereotyped like that? Let's go with Dr. Lowe, please.
Can I then say something about the notion about keeping your head down?
For sure,
Start
please,
from there,
please,
right?
wherever you'd
Because
like.
I think it's real that so I have had clients that will say their parents do tell them to do that, and I think it has to do with then. So for most of us who are first generation, we're more likely to tell our kids that, for the reason that a lot of us, or I am not in that category, but they escaped war, they escaped trauma, they had political oppression in their own country. And so I think it came with that. And also most Asian countries are not that far from the whole emperor system, right? And so I think that is still a lot in a lot of our psychic. And so I think I'm not surprised that some of the Asian Americans, the younger generations that are here, born and raised here, that heard that from their parents or elderly. Although I don't think that means then we do necessarily keep our head down. Depends on the personality, their upbringing, their sense of justice, and then or how much they value freedom and human rights. Then those they will speak up. So then there's those. But then they also then deal with a lot of resistance or lack of support from their community, right? Because then you're gonna make us look bad. So then there's a lot of very complicated dynamics that's within the speaking up and then keeping head down. And then speaking about model minority, I also want to say that it is a tool to divide and conquer. And I say, for one thing, I don't like to talk about model minority myth. I hope that term will just die, but I know it won't. And this is all, then if I have to say something about my model minority, this is all I want to share, is that with all the stereotype about how Asian Americans are doctors, lawyers, and all that. I've been in this country since 1995. Never once I was asked, so what law do you practice? What kind of medicine do you practice? And actually it's over and over when I tell people I'm a psychologist, still get mistaken as a salon worker, restaurant owner, masseuse. So I think that should prove that model minority truly is a myth. And another thing I want to add to that is that when we look at the income, oftentimes Asian American group will come out high. Their number is higher. Their income is more than even white people. And I would suspect part of it is because they are now calculating the money, the income from those who are undocumented. So there is a bipolar, like there's a group of people that do really well. And part of it is that our visa system, you have to prove, or any company that hires somebody that is foreign worker, the company has to justify that this candidate that we're about to hire is better than any American citizen. So what that means that we're hiring a lot of people that are highly skilled and highly educated. And so the income looks high. But then on the back end, we have unskilled, they call them unskilled workers. So they're undocumented and they get paid below the living wage. But those won't get into the statistics. And so it is not a true picture, right? So those are the things I want to share. And then with that, then talking about mental health side, then I work with kids that grow up that if their father or their mother was undocumented, all I need to just give you that picture. Imagine how stressful that is. That means the undocumented parent probably stay around their home or workplace. They don't get to show up at their kids' soccer play or any play, any activities. They probably also are not the one that's picking up the child. So imagine what that means for this child growing up and think about their father's fatherhood, think about their father's manhood, or their mother's motherhood, and then their mother's womanhood. All that then gets into affect their self-esteem and then how they show up and their sense of belonging. So just gonna give you a little piece of what that may look like and then what we deal with on our end in the mental health field.
Thank you, Dr. Lowe. Dr. Tang, I'd like to hear your perspective as well.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that. I appreciate what Dr. Lowe said, and I agree. I was like, I hope one day we can get rid of this model minority myth. But I will say that in the short term, I appreciate, I'm hopeful, that there's more conversation going on around these things, because even though obviously as an Asian American growing up, I had no awareness of this term. The only time I've learned about it was in, I think, undergrad or graduate school to kind of understand and realize that there was this concept. So I share that because I think that so often many Asian American Pacific Islander youth and even young adults or adults internalize a lot of these messages, right? Like, oh wait, why am I not succeeding? I'm supposed to be successful or whatnot. So I certainly feel like that then can bring on a lot of internalized sense of shame or guilt, which also can lead to, individuals struggling individually, that there isn't a lot of even seeking out. Like maybe I want to talk to either loved ones or a professional or something because it's just so internalized that they feel like that's something wrong with them rather than a systemic issue.
I understand. And I'm not trying to talk about the African American culture in this setting, but the whole hold your head down is not the African Americans' take on anything. We're taught to, well, that's a whole, but it's just so different, and we're all dealing with so many of the same things. So it's really enlightening to hear the different perspectives. I heard someone was about to say something.
Yeah, that was me. I just wanted to add to that because I earlier I talked about something called with a friend of mine. It was called we were talking about glide paths, and if you look at glide paths like from slavery, how long it took for I think about the Tuskegee Airmen. I think I mentioned that this is like their 80th year, and also all of the African American men and women who sacrificed their lives who went to war, right? So there is that glide path. And so after many generations, the next generation, is like stronger and they know the value, but there's still a fight going on. So let's not be naive. Racism absolutely exists. But you think about Korematsu, who also was he said, I'm not going into the internment camp. And basically he was jailed, but his allies supported him. And it took years, I think till 1944, where the Supreme Court overturned, the judgment against him. But before him, there was a gentleman by the name of Bayashi, who also experienced the same thing. They told him, you have to go to jail because you're not going to go into the internment camp. So I don't want to give the impression, or none of us, that we're just holding our heads down. It's just, it's taking that time. We're talking about 3 and 4 and 5th generations. They're so removed from what maybe myself being like that first generation and my mother. So my mother might be many of the young people's grandmothers or great grandparents, right? And so I think about that. I think about Plessy versus Ferguson, and I do the comparisons a lot because I think about it took so many years. He was dead. And finally, the Supreme Court overturned that judgment. That means a lot to people. And so even with Korematsu, that meant a lot. Some of the problems that I think that's so systemic with us in the United States is that we only talk about the colonialism and what they've won and what they've achieved, right? And so, but America is all of us. And so 442nd platoon was all Japanese Nisei who went to war. And then when they came back, they had to go visit their parents in internment camps. And so there was a Baptist minister who moved his ministry to that area as an ally, and he helped those Nisei who came back. They stayed at his place while they went and visited their parents, right? And it took a while to have our Supreme Court say, you know, this was an injustice. So I think that things are changing. And I said this before we came on, that it's unfortunate that it took lives to impact the community to say, wait a minute, you know, this is wrong. When Vincent Chin was killed, it was the African American community that came together and helped the, I think I talked to Roland Wong, I think is his last name, and he was saying that, you know, we did a Black Lives Matter, the APIA vote did a Black Lives Matter rally, and it was, he came and spoke and he said, you stood with us and we stand with you. So we have to, these are things that we work together, and with coming together, we see that we have a lot of similarities.
Absolutely.
And Padma Kupa made a comment about get a buddy, get someone, get involved in mainstream. So for those that want to say, what can we do? These are some of the things we can do. We can get involved. But then people who say, what can we do for you and with you, become a buddy, right? Padma Kupa is, she passes out literature, gives information in her area. She's got Clawson and Troy, I think. And she shows up, she's engaged, and she has friends that work with her. I call them those ride and die buddies. And we all have ride and die buddies, right? So grab your ride and die buddy. You're the one who's there to support you. And, you know, those are the people that will help you and get you through some of these tough times. But it's unfortunate that we are here because of a terrible event that happened. And so I just want to say there are people all through history who have been working quietly or not so quietly. A lot of us just don't know. They haven't learned about them. And I think this is a great platform to share about Korematsu, to share about, you know, individuals who have really took up the fight. You know, he said our Constitution. Yeah, he said it was our Constitution that didn't fail him. It was the people that were administering you know, the laws. So
absolutely. And we can continue to talk about that aspect. I do appreciate all of your knowledge on that. I don't want to leave Joy out because I haven't heard from you yet very much, because I do want to get a chance to talk about your experience not very long ago with hate crime and violence, personal experience. Joy, will you share with us, please?
Yeah, I can share. And I'm sure, I'm also sure this rally isn't that unique, actually, which is kind of disappointing, obviously, because with everything going on. But yeah, last summer I was in Seattle. I was interning virtually and I was living by myself. And I was heading towards the public market to hang out with a friend. And I walked past a bus and I saw people getting off. I knew where they were all going. Keep that mental, you know, in check. Where's everyone going? Make sure no one's gonna follow me, whatever. And then I ended up turning around and finding that a man who initially walked one way was following me. And then I got my mace out. I was lucky I had mace, you know, to kind of feel a little bit more secure. And then I realized he was yelling at me. I had my AirPods in as well, probably not a wise thing now that I look back, but he started yelling at me and like kind of jogging, running at me. And he was yelling things like, go back to China. Hey, you Asia girl, go back to Asia. And then I didn't even hear the rest because all of a sudden he got very close in a short amount of time. And then I just started running. I ran 3 blocks. No one was around to help. And I ran to a Starbucks and I told the ladies that this man was chasing me, and nothing happened, which was very interesting. Like the girls didn't do anything, which we can talk about. I don't know if you guys want to talk about allyship later, but that I think is a great way that we can even improve as well, just in for other minorities as well, as being allies to each other. But yeah, that was my incident, and yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And the part, like you said, no one did anything. And we've seen that in a number of the videos of different violent actions. No one does anything. I don't know if I want to talk to a mental health professional on that or just anyone. Why do we think people just stand by and do nothing? Is it fear? Is it not wanting to get involved? Is it don't care? I just don't want to believe that people really don't care.
I
What's
think
the perspective?
I think for you personally, for me, and this is literally just my personal opinion, I think part of the reason why a lot of people are very hesitant of getting involved when they see acts like that happened, in large part, it's because of the fear. Because we're in an era now when everyone has a cell phone, they get their cell phone out, and now overnight they could be globally known. So there's that anxiety of, if I get involved, will the whole world know who I am? There's also that fear, without diving too deep into it, because this could easily go down a whole different rabbit hole, but because of our very loose gun laws in this country, there's a fear that if somebody could get involved, there could be violence. And that could also potentially be something that people are afraid of. Like if they jump in, is it possible that person has a weapon on them? We don't know. So I think it's a combination of that personal safety along on top of the heightened of social media. Someone could live stream the event immediately as it's happening, and that person now is globally, their face is now affiliated with that incident. It's obviously not okay by any means, but that's just what I'm guessing is one reason why there's a lot of that hesitancy. There is a show that was on, I don't know if it's still on to this day, but it was called What Would You Do? And they would put in these scenarios where they would have actors come into these regular situations, and they would have, for example, someone would say racist things to somebody, or they would go up to, I think the episode I watched where an actor went up to random patrons in a restaurant and would say things like that group over there, those people over there, they're driving me crazy, da 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 da. And it was all hidden camera. And they would kind of talk about it from a psychological perspective of like watching. Some people got involved, some people stood up and said something and did things. Others were very like, let's just get our bill and just get out of here. I don't want to get involved. I need to move on. I don't have time for that. I'm too busy. It's very sad, but it is like what we've been seeing.
Joy, I want to ask you as well, how did that leave you feeling? Or do you feel safe in America, in your own home, in your culture, in your ethnic identity? Did that impact that at all, that experience?
Yeah, it definitely impacted, I think, my level of fear that I have when I'm out by myself, because I tend to go running around my neighborhood, but my neighborhoods generally, I haven't heard of any, occurrences or anything. But I think just knowing, even with everything else happening to all these other Asians across like New York City, LA, California, or whatnot, it's scary knowing that like you could be that first incident in your city, even if something hasn't happened. So I think yeah, I definitely feel a little bit more fearful, but obviously living in fear is not the way to go as well. I think we need to be confident and trying to help educate others, and yeah, like sharing my experience, helping others to see what would be the right thing to do, which would be to at least help the person who is being victimized, or who is the victim. Because even if that doesn't mean, necessarily reporting the person who is chasing me, if you're scared of combating that person, I think checking up on the person who is actually being acted upon would speak volumes for sure.
Sure. At this time, I think I want to talk about the mental aspect of it. How does the body metabolize trauma? Either one of the doctors, or what is happening with the body when you encounter things like that? Dr. Lo or Tang, whichever one would like to address that. Metabolizing trauma. Okay.
Tang, would you like to go for it?
Dr. Lo, you unmuted first, so I'll let you, if you can.
Oh, I was gonna see if Dr. Tang want to go first. I wanna, can I first say something about the, so what happened to Joy? And Dan said that it was fear. I think part of it, this is tied to mental health as well, is shock. Sometimes it's shock, and then we go into that play dead space. So we cannot think about what to say, what to do. And so with that, I want to share that now there's quite a bit of bystander intervention training that you can find online. And so this is sort of like teaching kids good touch, bad touch. And then for them to know when somebody touch you a certain way, how do you respond? Except that this is an adult version that we learn, like how do we respond when things like that happen? So we have more confidence in self-efficacy, and when something happens, we feel more confident in intervening. So that's one thing I want to share. And then the other thing, so about trauma is that, so I actually, so I said that I came to this country in 1995. I was in Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. In 1999, there was a white man who was shooting Black, Jewish, and Asian people. And then he started from Chicago and was traveling south, and then came to Urbana-Champaign. And what he did was that he hid behind an Asian church when they came out of worshiping, and then he started shooting them. And so that was just my 4th year in the United States. And what that taught me is that any area where there's a group of Asian people that will congregate can be a shooting ground for these white supremacists, right? So when I go grocery shopping at Asian grocery stores, when I go anywhere there's a group of Asian people, I have that heightened, quote unquote, the PTSD reaction. And a little bit about that is that there was a Taiwanese student, just got there. He got shot on 5th Street. And I lived on the corner of 5th and Healy. And I remember when I heard what had happened to him, first thing into my mind, that could have been me. And so that is also adding, so when I show up at these places, I had a heightened reaction. And so this is another tip for folks in talking about trauma, is that if you have something that happened either directly to you or indirectly to you, expect that your body will register that as a way of protecting you. Just like when we got bit by a dog, then next time when we see a dog, we will have some kind of reaction. That's body's natural way to protect you. Although it may not actually be a dog, it may just be, I don't know, a stuffed animal somewhere, right? And so then, although your body will respond. And so one thing that I think is so powerful but underutilized tool is our breath. So if you are in a situation, you feel like your heart is racing, you cannot calm down, then find a way to take deep breath to then help take care of yourself, to calm your body. And so then it can then start to respond and think about how to take care of yourself more rationally. So that's one thing that I want to share. And in another way, Gail, and I don't know if Dr. Tang would agree with this, our body doesn't really metabolize trauma. We will have to. So know that trauma usually is a problem because it got stuck in our body. So some of the work that we do is to help the person to release that reaction, release that impact, so then that our body can start to heal. And I don't know if maybe then this is a part that Dr. Tang can take over, is then maybe talk about how do we then access mental health, because that's important. That's where then healing can happen.
Yes, I like that question. And to tie that in, when is it time to seek professional help? Dr. Tang.
Sure. Yeah. First, I wanted to thank Joy just for being so vulnerable and sharing personal experience. I'm so sorry to hear that in such a scary situation that you went to seek out help and resources weren't there to do what they needed them. And I appreciate Dr. Lowe just kind of explaining a little bit more about just kind of how the body reacts to trauma. I was just thinking that same parallel about like when we think about a dog attack, again, even when we go on a walk, any cues that will remind us of something, our body will physiologically kind of respond in a way. And so I think there's like two aspects to it. I think one is when we're experiencing some of these things, if it's impacting our daily functioning, like if we're having trouble sleeping, we're missing out on work, or trouble engaging in our relationships in our lives, and even that's kind of impacting our overall functioning, that would be a good time to kind of seek out some professional support. But that being said, too, I personally see counseling from a strength-based perspective. I certainly know individuals who more proactively kind of seek it out, more kind of like preventative care and or just kind of further empowering themselves, just being able to share and talk about some of their experiences and have their feelings validated and be very empowering. So it also doesn't have to be like it has to get to this extreme situation for you to seek support. I think anyone can benefit from just having an intentional space, even if it's for themselves, to know like this is a time where I can kind of go and kind of process some of these things I'm experiencing, or I'm not even sure what I'm thinking or feeling, and being able to kind of talk it out and feel okay naming it and saying these things. So yeah, that's kind of my perspective.
Very good. Thank you.
And your
Laura,
insurance
sure.
pays for it.
I'm sorry, what did you say, Dr. Lowe?
So your insurance pays for it. So for
Yes,
people who have
there you are.
insurance, know that is a benefit.
And if you don't have insurance, I'm sure there's something that covers some sort of assistance for things like that. So it's very important. And I don't mind, doctors, if you want to type your information in the chat area for anyone who's interested in contacting you. You're more than welcome to do that. Laura, I did see you type a comment in the chat as well, and I'd like you to actually speak on that because some people may not be reading what you said. Limitations by focusing on interpersonal bystander acts of solidarity. Expound on that a little bit, please.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, well, first and foremost, too, I just want to thank the two mental health professionals on the panel as well, because I think something that's important to note is that Asian Americans are the least likely to seek mental health treatment until it is a more drastic and serious situation. And I think that that's something that, breaking out of that stigma and finding mental health professionals that are Asian American is really challenging. So I'm so glad that, that you all are here. But I did want to just mention as well, it is really challenging. I think, many of us who've been on this panel and other panels as well have been asked, what can we do? And I think it's a challenging question because the issue is all encompassing. We're talking about combating white supremacy in all the ways that it shows up in different communities. So something that, I'm reminded of as well is that I experienced levels of anxiety after the shootings in Atlanta myself. It's something that I was, surprised by. I didn't expect to feel that way. And I'm reminded too that so many of our Black and brown brothers and sisters, when they go outside, kind of feel a similar level of anxiety and dread when they see a cop car or anything like that. And so I think that there's something about acknowledging, the challenges and asking people, yes, if you're able to take a bystander intervention class, please do. If you're able to, build up that response level so that you're able in a moment to intervene, that's great. I think at the same time, it's important for us to also acknowledge and put resources, time, and energy into organizing around these broader systemic changes that we need to acknowledge so that this doesn't happen again. Like a bystander intervening is only going to come in it's only going to come into play when a thing is happening, right? And when you need to intervene. But if we could prevent it from happening in the first place, that would probably be better. And I think that's a much, a longer haul systemic thing that I think, having to fight on all fronts is an important thing. I just wanted to raise.
And I wanted to jump in on that, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, so, that brings up a good point about being civil, about being inclusive, respectful. And oftentimes we need models for that as well throughout our communities and also in the bigger picture. I thought about, and I had to look that up, but it was in 2008, it was in Minnesota. The presidential candidate was John McCain, and he was at a town hall. And if anybody remembers what happened there, President Obama was running for office as well. And two of the people at this particular town hall got up and they said some really nasty, disparaging remarks about our president, now President Obama. And something that John McCain did, I thought it showed civility, respect. What he said to those people in his own town hall was that, first of all, he broke the myth that the lie that they were spreading. He says that President Obama was a decent man. He was a family man. And he said, and he is a citizen, because those were the lies that were being spread. And he didn't do it disrespectfully. And a lot of times it's just simply enough to say to someone, that's not, what you're saying is wrong. You don't have to get into a big fight with someone to say, that's, you're stereotyping. What you're doing is, not everybody's like that. And you know what you're saying is not true. And you don't have to entertain that, right? You can shut that down. So it is very shocking to see someone get brutalized. Joy, I feel for you. I am so sorry you went through that experience. I can't imagine what that fear is like, to have them right up on you, because even today, when I walk, I've never had to worry about who's behind me. And I have to say, and I've told my friends this, today I am a little concerned and worried. I've never had to do that in the past. I fear for my mother, who is in her 80s, who is just not into what, she's really not into the news and what's going on here so much, but she's getting it through, Japan TV or whatever. So who would hurt an 80-year-old woman or man who is not expecting to get pushed down, knocked down, or slashed across the face? I mean, these are the images that I've seen on television, and they are very scary. So, like I said, I never had to worry about that in the past, in terms of, yeah, I've been insulted. But to see someone actually step up on you, that's a shock.
Yeah.
That's a shock. So Joy, like I said, man, my heart goes out to you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, take
Appreciate
care.
it so much. And
Yeah.
I'm thinking, and maybe I've asked it already, but I want to revisit it again. Where is all of this hate coming from? Is this hate, are these people with mental issues? Is it political? How can we attack what's going on head on? Is it just a random thing? Is it white supremacy? What is it, in your view? Let's talk to you, Dan. I haven't heard from you in a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So if I'm understanding the question correctly, it's like, where is this hate coming from?
Sure.
I think honestly, it is a multifaceted answer. Like, it is so complicated. I could be here forever if I was to break it down. But I would honestly say, I think just again, from my personal experience, I grew up in a community where it is 90% white. When you grow up in an area that is very isolated from a diverse community, I'm going back to that, it's probably one of my favorite phrases, that cognitive dissonance, meaning that it's sad that that happens, but at the same time, it's like, that doesn't happen on my doorstep. So therefore it's like, oh, it must be something you see in a film, or maybe they might be over exaggerating. That almost disconnect ends up happening. So if I was to pin down a couple of different factors of where this hate is coming from, I think a lot goes back to an old Buddhist belief, is that it goes back to that ignorance. The ignorance fuels that fear, that fuels the hatred, and that ends up manifesting into what we're seeing now. So a couple of factors that I feel that can contribute to that is, for example, I've seen this rephrased multiple times. Studying European history, for example, is a standard. studying Asian history is an elective. It wasn't until I was in 7th grade that I even remotely learned about Asia at all in my geography classes. I grew up learning a lot about Europe and how they came over here and our American history that we've been kind of force-fed since birth.
Yeah.
And it felt very alienating because it almost kind of felt like, and again, this is just me speaking, it felt very much like your people don't really matter here. You didn't play a role in our country's history.
Oh,
You
Dan, I'm
weren't-
trying so hard to keep my mouth shut about Africa. We are so connected
Yeah.
because African Americans are nodding. We can definitely understand where you're coming from. So
Yeah,
please continue.
absolutely. So what that does that say that our teachers were terrible? No, that's the way the standard was passed so much. So what happened was that it ends up becoming that internalized where it's like, I guess as a Filipino American, we weren't here. We didn't play a role. We don't really matter. And it makes people feel dehumanized. Even if it's not overtly like I feel dehumanized, it's that, well, I guess I don't play much of a role. My family didn't come over with the Mayflower. They didn't come here with this and that. And of course, if we would ask a Native person, it's a whole different conversation.
Absolutely.
But over time, that manifests to where it's like, if that old saying, if you're not at the dinner table, you're on the menu. And because this has become so normalized, it feeds into society's views of like who these people are. It fuels into our media and our TV shows, that underrepresentation, that idea of being historically excluded from these different teachings. So I think at the base core of it all, when it comes to where is this hatred coming from, it comes from a lot of that own ignorance. I've lost count, and maybe Joy, you might be able to relate to this because again, from an adoptee to an adoptee, oh man, your stories. It almost becomes very alienating where you leave the house and no matter how the parents raised you, and this is something that we had a panel discussion with an adoptee group, the world's going to treat you differently. They're going to see this first. They're not going to know like who are your parents. And I've gotten countless times of, do your people do this? Literally phrased this way. Does your culture do this? And I'm like, I grew up so severed from my own culture.
Yeah.
And it becomes that alienation to where when you move into the culture, it's like, what kind of Filipino are you? Don't you know this? Don't you know that? It's like, no. So you get orphaned. So on a much larger scale, a lot of these communities that feel this way, we got orphaned. That's what the diaspora ends up being, is that we're so disconnected from it. So tying it all back with that question, where's this coming from? When communities have that lack of diversity, that lack of education, that lack of historical representation needed in media and in our history classes, it ends up becoming that whole, those groups, they're taking your jobs. That classic that's been around for ages. That's what fueled the Yellow Peril.
Yeah.
They're coming for us. They're coming for you. And when that gets fueled, it becomes that anger and that hatred. And then it passes policies that disproportionately affect these communities that are getting targeted. So hopefully that kind of answered
it. Does, absolutely, it does. I can relate to every last thing that you said. Thank
My
you,
brain
Dan.
literally does this.
And
So
I'm kind of
just
all
like,
over the place, so please forgive me, but I do notice in the chat and in the comment section on Facebook, people are typing both and. Talk about that. Who wants to take that? I saw you.
I typed that in. I was going to add to what Laura has said about the systemic and then the bystander. And like Dan said, this is a multifaceted issue. So it has to come from different directions. Right. That's what we're talking about.
Sure. And I see a number of people typed it in the comment section as well. I want to ask about this. I've heard people say, and I could be saying it wrong, we are us and they are them, or something like that. I think, I heard Dan, I think, say something like that. Was it right? Is that a statement like we and they are them? Help me, somebody.
Yeah, I think I might have said that. Basically, what that boils down to is when you look, I'm going to put this out there. There was a YouTuber I love watching, and she actually tackled White History Month Education 101. Because that old classic saying of like, well, we got Black History Month, we have Asian American History Month, why don't we have White History Month?
Oh.
Y'all want to know about white history? Okay, so she tackled into it and did a 2-part episode and broke down what is whiteness? What is the connection to that with Caucasian? whiteness in of itself is a moving target historically. Some communities were considered to be white, others were not considered to be white. And over time, these communities have evolved into this is us, that is them. We get these resources and these financial benefits. We get land that gets inherited from us, all these other different things. They, on the other hand, they have to do this. They have to work harder. They have to find the resources. This is what we've been seeing throughout this pattern through history. It boils down to almost kind of like, in the way that she words it, and I believe her name was Kat Black, she basically words it down into almost like a social club, a very, very upscale, fancy social club, and that certain people get the card, some people don't. And some people have a much longer waiting list, and some people could get the fast pass and get straight into there. And what it boils down to is that idea of we have what we have because it was based on our individualism. It goes into an even bigger scope of the culture of Western culture versus East Asian culture. The idea of we are we, it is us, it was up to us, it was individual. So when it comes to that idea of this person started off poor and they became wealthy, look at how wonderful that is. As long as there's some level of upward mobility, this is why it's such a complicated topic, because it's like, it's not about you and your successes. You worked hard, great, that's awesome. It's that systemic issue, the bigger issue, saying if this one person made it, then why are all these people of the same ethnicity not getting the same benefits or even the resources to even get anywhere? So that's what it means by like, we are we, they are us. It boils down to that whole complicated structure where it says we need that division. In order for us to exist, they have to have less. I think one book I read said this constantly throughout the chapters. You exist because others exist to get less. You exist because others exist to get less. And because that has been historically ingrained in our society on a global scale, but has been exacerbated through slavery, through colonization, it has become basically the summary of where we are today. We're still standing in the shadows of our history. We're not far removed. Most of the people who are in these photos that we see during the peace protests and all that in the past are still alive and have active memories of being there. I have a friend of mine who was telling me her father was born in the Japanese internment camps. There are people who have living memory of what this was. This is not far off. And then our descendants are going to be inheriting an earth with history. And that's where we're basically at.
I'd like to know.
I wanted to jump in on that.
Sure.
If that's okay. I think that we can even be more explicit about that too, right? Like who is American and who is white has been defined as not Black. And I think that, you know, the history of a lot of the cases, like so the court cases that have kind of constructed the legal definition of who counts as American, who counts as white, a lot of that has all been layered. There's a lot of cases that were brought by Asian Americans, by Japanese Americans, by South Asians, you know, to kind of how do we fit in that hierarchy. And so I think, you know, we'd be remiss if we didn't raise that as well, because the whole conception of who becomes American and who becomes white is a construct that's meant to keep certain folks in power. And I think that to kind of speak to the issue of, you know, what do we do or where do we go from here? For me, that also shows us the path forward as well. It's about building deep relationships and solidarity with other folks of color, with Black and brown folks in particular, if we're Asian American, and being able to kind of build out that solidarity. What does that really look like? What do those relationships look like? You know, Lee mentioned earlier, who's your ride or die? Like, who's coming with you? You know, and like that means that just as we're asking for folks to stand in solidarity with us today, that we show up for the movement for Black lives as well. It means that we have to show up and see how all those threads tie together as well, across racial lines, because it is not something that we solve for ourselves and then it's okay, then we can step back, right? This is an issue that has different faces for different folks, and we have to address it as such.
For sure.
Yeah. Do you still have just a little time? Because I wanted
We do. I think I told some people 7:30 and some 8, so we'll just hang out until 8. Is that okay?
Okay. I just wanted to kind of um, kind of piggyback off of what Laura both and what Dan said, because I do believe this is, you almost have to go all the way back, because this is very, very systemic. There's a book that's called The Sum of Us, and they in the book, the young lady talks about the fact that the haves and the have-nots, right? Those who, you have to have less in order for me to feel like, empowered and I have more. So she talks about in the South how they used to have swimming pools, and these swimming pools were like, because this was predominantly white, they were segregated, and these were very elaborate, and they were taken care of by funds and monies. Well, what happened is when segregation was removed, and so these became now desegregated, the people that were in them either went to their private clubs, and or they turned around and they dismantled those public swimming pools. They would rather drain that swimming pool than to have it be desegregated. And so what we're seeing is, the Sum of Us in the book is that I would rather lose out myself than to have you get one iota. And we see this when people say things like, oh, my girlfriend's an engineer, and they go, oh, she must have got there through affirmative action. No, she didn't. She worked really hard, and she isn't, she earned that. But there's just these little, what I had said earlier, these little micro insults that let you know that you're not quite as good, you're not quite up there, And so that book, and there's a book called Caste, and those books kind of helped me sort of really kind of understand some of the dynamics that are going on. And again, politicians, very, very important here, because they perpetuate a lot of this in order to keep their constituents, in order to get their votes. And so this is where what we can do, when we talk about what we can do, I go back to get involved. I think that this second, third, fourth, and fifth generation are stepping out there, and they are running for office. And you know what? And don't forget that where you're not doing it by yourself. Just like in all communities, you stand on the shoulders of somebody else who did it before you, who suffered, who really went through a lot, right, to get you to where you are today. So I think about those things, but I brought those two books up. I'm going to put them in here because for the viewers that you have, I think they're going to find them very, very enlightening.
I have a question, and I see partly the question typed in the chat. What do you do with cities that think they don't have racism in their city? Predominantly white, I see your facial expression, Laura. Predominantly white cities that think everything's okay. How do you work to dismantle racism in those instances, when often things may be microaggressions that I don't know if they don't recognize, or they just are just in denial? Help me with that. What do you say in those circumstances? Laura, I'm going to call on you.
I would ask, why is it so white? If it's a predominantly white city, how did it end up that way, right? Like, these are, people try to make it seem, I think, Dan alluded to this earlier as well, like, oh, it's all an individual choice. I just happened to move here because the schools are better. Why are the schools better? Why does your zip code determine whether or not you're going to have a good public education, or whether or not your school will be well funded, or whether or not the city budget will have more for recreation and enrichment and youth jobs than it does for police? I think that there's a lot to say about how a city structures itself, and then the history of how these cities were created, and how segregated they are, how inaccessible they are now, how unaffordable. That really speaks to how white supremacy shows up on that structural level. You don't necessarily have to harbor prejudice, ill will towards any individual person of color. If you are a white person in a position of power in a city where 80–90% of your constituents are white, there is no way that white supremacy does not exist in your city. Because if it didn't, then your
Slow
city
down a
wouldn't
minute
look
and
like
say
that
again, Laura. Say that one more time, that last part.
Yes, you know, if you are a white elected official in a city where your constituency is 80-90% white, there is no way that there is no racism or white supremacy in your city, because if there wasn't, it would not look that way. If you had a city that was integrated, if you had a city that was accessible, equitable, and valued justice and dismantling white supremacy, it would be more integrated. And if it isn't, then that is at the core of why your city is the way that it is, period.
Anyone else have an opinion on that?
I think another way to look at whether there's racism in our city, it would be to look at the curriculum. I bet that it's European centered. And so that's another very visible way to see that there is racism.
Okay, yeah.
I
I
would,
want to,
I'm sorry.
Dr. Tang, sure.
Yeah, I was just going to add, something that I wish all of us hopefully will learn is that it's not whether or not if racism exists or if we've been racist, but kind of just assuming that we've been part of this society and culture, that we've internalized racism, unless we are actively and proactively kind of doing what we can to counter it. And I think Laura listed a lot of real articulated thoughts of all the things city-wise that can be impacted in reflecting kind of this institutional racism, but really kind of recognizing that it exists. I think that's one thing, is that so oftentimes we see these overt hate crimes, right? The killings, the attacks, the name calling as racist, but recognizing, like Linda mentioned, right? So these microaggressions too that are also so pernicious.
Just want to like piggyback off on that before I forget this part, because you nailed it on the head when we were talking about like, I'm not racist, I'm not racist, I'm not racist. What it boils down to is intent versus impact. We've been taught for so long, if you keep saying my intentions were good, my intentions were good, I didn't intend to hurt you, I didn't intend to do this. It's like the reality of the world is we cannot read anyone's intention. That is not humanly possible to read someone's intention or what's in their heart. That is not possible. The only thing that we can read is the actions. So one YouTuber I like to watch basically put it this way. It's kind of like, if I stepped on someone's toes, I didn't intend to, but I broke their toe. I could sit there all day and say, I didn't intend on breaking your toe. I didn't intend on breaking your toe, but their toe is broken. They're in pain. They need some medical attention. But that's the thing, is that we've been taught so much about that whole good intentions mentality, that whole like, oh, I didn't intend to hurt you. Like I was mentioning earlier, the two people who were on my wall who consistently kept like belittling the experiences of myself and other other Asians, we were talking in a little bit of a group chat, they kept coming back with, it's not my intention to hurt someone, it was my intention to be good. I have XYZ person of color family member. I have best friends who are XYZ people of color, insert identity here. And it's like, that's awesome. That's wonderful. But racism is more complicated than just liking someone or disliking someone because of their race. It's that participation. It is that internalization. And that goes even within our own communities. Like, I've been learning a lot that there is a lot of this hesitancy of calling out our own communities. And especially within our own Asian communities, where we would hear like our titas and titos and our older siblings, where we're just kind of like, I don't want to call it out because I want to respect, but it's like, that's wrong. It's wrong. And that even goes on to the whole community level. And it can be scary and it could be uncomfortable, but at the end of the day, that's what makes that change. So even if somebody said something and like, it wasn't my intention to come across this way, it wasn't my intention to do this, it goes back to, again, it's like, I can't judge that. I just see the action and I don't like what I saw. Let's take this moment as a educational opportunity. And let me explain to you why this was wrong. It doesn't have to be this big epic battle. It literally could just be a conversation back and forth.
I'm
So
appreciating this. I did see someone type at one of the chats are scrolling by so quickly. So if I don't get to your question, forgive me. I'll scroll. We're going to have the part 2. Don't forget, register for May 1st. I don't even know if I have it on the calendar yet, but I will. May 1st, 6:30. I'm going to get through these questions as well. One thing I do want to ask, because I'm always concerned about the children and the younger generation, even though I have a lot of young generations. What do we tell, or Asian Americans tell their children about what's going on with hate crimes? And do they share some of their experiences with you, or how do you know what's going on? I mean, if you're in a neighborhood or community where you are in the minority and you're in school or you're in wherever, they may not even share, especially if the tradition is to hold your head down, even if it isn't that anymore. What do you tell your children? I think that should be a question for the professionals.
Yeah, I was gonna jump in there and say that I think what's important is for us, especially as Asian Americans, as we're talking about, we are so internalized, kind of being silent and trying to avoid, just in terms of just survival, to recognize that if they're not hearing it directly from the parents, they're getting these messages from the people that are saying it to them, that's targeting them in some sort of racist fashion. And there's research, I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head, but they show that, children as young as toddlers are already starting to distinguish, race, right? And so like I'm looking at my own toddlers where they're like, oh, well, I want to draw, golden hair. Golden hair is more beautiful, so they're already kind of hearing these messages or internalizing certain messages. So I think it's important to have some sort of conversation with them. And I think it's hard to kind of summarize, but a couple of my thoughts would be, one, I think helping them just be proud of their ethnic heritage, and recognizing that that is important and that's also who they are, just as much as they are American, and then it's also the sense of like, they are experiencing certain things, just to be able to hear them and try to put words to the emotions that they might be feeling. And this kind of goes with a lot of things, but not just with around race or racism, but just being able to help them because they're trying to figure out their emotions. Oh, wow, that sounds like that makes you sad when your friend says that to you, so just being curious and hearing them. I think that's because that starts at a young age. If we're quick to dismiss it, like, no, your friend didn't mean it that way, so I think it's important just to be able to hear them and validate what they're feeling.
Would you initiate a question like that with your child? Would you ask them, have you experienced anything that's racially offensive or derogatory statements? Would you pose that question to a child of school age? Because often they would not bring it up, I would imagine. Anyone can answer if the professionals don't have an answer. Dr. Lowe, is that one that you can maybe address? Would you recommend or comment on?
I would say that, like, because in general, I don't have children, but I imagine that in general, we want to make sure we are the safe place that our kids will tell us if something went wrong. And so I wouldn't put that burden on them to have to distinguish whether it's racially motivated or not. But the fact that somebody is mistreating them, they are hurt either emotionally or physically, I would like to know. And for them to let me know, and for me to understand what had happened. And also, if age appropriate, empower them. So teach them, give them some ideas of how they can handle it on their own.
Mm-hmm.
If it's not age appropriate and I feel like I as a parent need to step in, then I will then do that.
Okay.
Although I think that also requires that parents know how to help the little ones.
Mm-hmm.
So that might be another program.
Yes, it will. I'm already counting the programs that we're going to have. We only have a few minutes and we're going to end a little bit with comments from everyone, but I do want to get to Dan because we've been chatting back and forth in the chat, haven't we, Dan? And I want you to get out what we're talking about because it is important, and you feel free to say whatever your heart's desire. This is an open platform here.
Absolutely. So I'm going to formally mention this now, and we literally just launched this recently. But one aspect when it comes to activism is, like Laura was mentioning earlier, as many of the panelists have mentioned earlier, we have to take it in the streets, we have to take it in politics, we have to take it in every single aspect, because white supremacy has been so ingrained in our education systems, into the medical studies, into everything. So one thing that I've been working on with a team of about 35 people of color and from different backgrounds, different wide range, is we are actually formally working on a TV show, completely grassroots here in Michigan. So what the show is about, it's a docudrama series that we are planning on launching, and we're planning on trying to record the first episode sometime in the summer. And ultimately what we would love to do is pitch this to Netflix or HBO. So the show is a docudrama, as mentioned. So it takes the aspect of the documentary side and the drama side. And the story is basically a show that focuses on a biracial family, a fictional family with the last name the Arbors. And the father is Black, the mother is Filipino, and they have 3 biracial children. Each one of the children, in the way that I'm writing the show, is kind of like a representation to some extent of the diaspora of people of color. You have a wide range of different political views, you have a wide range of different identities, and they own a bubble tea shop out in the suburbs. They're from the city, but but their shop is out in the suburbs in a fictional town called Verona Hills, in a fictional county called Motor Lake. And it is located south of Oakland, south of Macomb, and north of Wayne, stretches from Livingston County to Lake St. Clair. All of the characters in the show overwhelmingly are people of color. And also with my production staff. In fact, I established an LLC in the midst of the 2020 pandemic, which is where all this got inspired from. Shout out to Kim's Convenience. That was a show that kind of kicked it off. It originally started off as a sitcom, but as I was writing the screenplay, it got very serious. And I was like, this is going to be a drama. And we have characters of the LGBT community. We have an adoptee who is also trans male, an East Asian adoptee who's trans male. We have a Native American who is Ojibwe and Mexican. We also have a Sephardic Jewish Iberian doctor and a Yemeni Muslim girl. And it's every episode throughout the first season is going to focus on a day in the life of each one of these characters. And it's going to lead up to a very significant change at the end of the season. I kind of want to spoil it so people can get an idea, but I'm going to put it this way. It is a massive hate. It's a massive hate crime that ends up happening. And that's the season finale. Okay. Ideally, if we get enough money, we would move on to season 2 and we would focus on the after effects of what happened in season 1. So the show's focusing heavily on mental health. It's focusing heavily on intersectionality. A lot of my characters deal with anxiety, depression, ADHD. They have different, like multiple different aspects about these characters. And all of the characters in the show are so in depth. There's no side characters. And there's a bit of a writing trick that I'm also doing with the show where there's going to be background characters that you will later find out in a later episode are actually major characters, because what that's going to do is it's going to play on the audience's notion of the background character, because in reality, we're all major characters in our own stories.
For sure. Dan, so I'm going to have you back. I'm definitely going to have you back. You're going to tell us a little more about it, because this is really relative, what you're talking about and what you're putting together. So I commend you on your project.
Thank you.
We only have like a few more minutes, and I want to give everyone just at least a few seconds to touch on just some final closing remarks for this episode. I'm having you back. Just remember, maybe some things about what should be done. I know we've talked about it. Should there be sympathy? Should there be empathy? Should there be conversation? Should there be action? Of course, action or something else. Let's start with Linda.
Yeah, I think all three, everything you mentioned should be there. Everything. And I just want to say real quick that the rallies that we've had where people have seen each other and the support that they have kind of gotten has been wonderful for the community. And young people, I saw a lot of young people there of all nationalities. And I think that the more that we see that, I think that's going to build a stronger community between all of the different ethnic groups. So I'm hoping that that happens. But everything you said, absolutely. Empathy and sympathy. And how about, let's throw in love. Just love and respect for each other. So
for sure. I like that. Joy, I'd like you to make a comment as well.
Yeah, I think to add on that, conversations and education are two things that definitely shouldn't be underestimated. And because I think with the conversations that everyone's been talking about, like just deferring or basically stopping those microaggressions that Linda has talked about so many times. And those are just simple, easy things for people to do. And I think that also stems from, like you said, love and respecting other people, taking the time to think, if I was that person, what would I want like someone else to do for me? Yeah, so yeah, this has all been so great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Laura?
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly, conversations like this are awesome. And I would say too, you know, Gail, I feel like you held back a little bit in trying to bring in some of the comparable experiences that you've had as a Black woman in the Black community. And I think that we should have more conversations that are across race lines, that are able to show, you know, where are the similarities, where are the differences, and be able to talk about that in a way that builds real authentic relationships across race lines. I think that's so important. And I also think that, you know, being able to ground what we do moving forward in healing, you know, be it for yourself, like with the help of therapy, be it healing in groups, you know, like as Linda mentioned, like having a rally space or a space where people can publicly grieve or come together, I think is so important. And my organization is also trying to make sure that we're holding space like that. And I think that it's easy for people to say, oh, it's been, you know, several weeks since the Atlanta shootings, you know, I'm back to normal. And I think it's always good and a reminder to hold space in case it's not, because you never know. And so to that end, if I might put in a little plug, we are doing a virtual picnic for Asian American identified women. It's actually open to all women, now that I think about it. And the registration I'll put in the chat. It is case sensitive, but it's next Sunday from 2 to 3:30, and we're just trying to create some space for folks to get to know each other and build community, which I know has been really hard during the pandemic. So any opportunity that we can, I think, is really important. So that's what I would say.
Thank you so much. Dr. Tang?
Yeah, I think if I were to summarize it, I would say do something and do more. You know, I think so much of it, going back to that bystander effect, you know, I think a lot of us, again, see it as like, well, I can't do much about changing policy, or I can't change who's in office or anything like that. But we all have our different spheres of influence. So being able to do anything, you know, an analogy I use is like, it's like a treadmill. We stay still, we're actually going backwards. So whether that is, you know, reaching out to people we know, whether that's reading books to further educate ourselves, just doing something more than what we're doing currently, you know, just stretching our outside of our comfort zone, and putting ourselves vulnerably. If we're like, I don't understand, can you tell me more about that? Or I had no idea, this is completely changing my perception of the world I live in, but I want to take it at face value, what you're telling me, and hearing that.
All right, very good. Dr. Lowe?
Don't have anything to add.
Okay, all right. I don't think you closed out, so you can have 10 seconds, Dan, to close out your comment. I think you more so talked about your film. So I say 10 seconds, but 20 seconds.
Well, basically at the end of the all is, like we were mentioning throughout the panel, first off, I cannot thank enough for discussions like this, like for all of us, because what this is doing is giving us a platform in a world where we feel completely voiceless or ignored or sidelined or gaslit. And at this point, we're all pretty tired of it. So we want to definitely thank you, Gail, for giving us this platform, allowing us to speak, and then opening, like Laura mentioned, like being able to say, I don't know this, please tell me this. That alone creates massive change in the world. When somebody says, I don't know, please educate me on this, that's perfectly okay. Obviously, they don't represent the entire community, but at the same time, it's that feeling of like, I really don't know. I grew up, like I was mentioning earlier, completely severed from my own culture. So I don't know a lot of things, and I'm always open to learning something new. So we need more of these discussions and more of this action.
Absolutely. We certainly will have that. I did read along the chat, and that's given hatred stems from ignorance. And I'm hoping to educate as many as we can along the way. And with that, once you listen, action speaks louder than words. It's time to act. And I believe that's very important. I did like what you suggested, and I already had that in mind. We're going to do a cross racial lines program. I did not want to focus this particular event on the African American experience, because we do have those conversations frequently. I did want to devote specifically to the Asian American experience, and then we can pull it all together. And I think, wow, once we start pulling it all together, we'll really see who the minority is, won't we? Because I think a lot of us have the experiences that we can all relate to. I'd like to thank everyone all of my guests for agreeing to participate in this conversation with me, this dialogue. I invite you back. I will contact you shortly. And if you have other friends, let's just bring it all in, and we're going to talk until we can't stop, until things start to change. And thank you all for listening, both through Zoom and through Facebook Live. This will be on Facebook for as long as it'll be on Facebook, so you can always revisit it and share it with family and friends, and maybe help get some understanding to the areas that you need understanding in. Thank you all very much, and have a good evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For having us.